Alright, so we're going to go on Hilchos Basar בחלב, Siman second days, and with Hashem we'll finish Sif Tes, the last Sif of the. Before we go on to the last Sif, just a couple of points about Sif Tes. And I want to double check it, that's why I asked you then to remind me. The din of Kisui, Hakaderov, covering using a Melicha cover, Melicha lid to cover a fleshike pot. As we said, is a problem, especially if it's a ben yoima, that you need shishin keneged kol kisui. In other words, you have a melchike cover, a melchike lid on top of a fleshike pot, or the other way around. The Aruch HaShulchan adds, and I want to see it inside in the Beis Yosef because he quotes the Beis Yosef, that the nekud over there, the point that we're dealing with over here that makes a whole difference is that V'shohos man nikar v'kisuy al hasheni. In other words, that it was a reasonable amount of time covering the pot. So, the idea perhaps behind this is gzeya. In other words, if you have two pieces of metal touching each other and there's no liquid whatsoever, what should be the problem? As was raised last week. So, it is understood that if the emphasis here is that they were with each other, one was covering the other for a certain amount of time, it is therefore implied, and that's what I just want to double check, it is implied that the source of the trouble will be the zeya, the steam, the vapor that goes up. And once you have vapor, that is a form of liquid. That is not only a form of liquid, it's considered a real liquid. As we saw in Sif Ches is pretty much all about zeya. That as opposed to reicha, that opposed to just having the odors, zeya is significant. As long as the zeya is yatzoledes boy, something that is steaming from the bottom, reaching the top, reaching a pot. And even though the pot is a barrier for the food within the pot, nonetheless, the zeya b'makom shinogad, the zeya on the spot where it touches, if it's yad soledes bo, it does have the effect of transmitting the tam of whatever is being cooked underneath onto whatever is being cooked on top. So here with the lid, even though it's a piece of metal sitting on top of another piece of metal, ultimately, even though we're not talking about a tipas cholav shenofal ala kisui, even though this example is not about drops of blood falling on top of the kisui, which was another scenario that we had in the Ramah, it would involve anyway a similar situation because one is milchik and one is fleshik. In other words, the whole kisui, in the scenario of the Ramah, the kisui of the gdera was of the same type as the gdera. They were both fleshik. But the problem there was drops of milk falling on top of the kisui. And we were concerned, well, does it mix at some point with the tafshil? And even if it does not mix with the tafshil because of the steam, then at least it causes trouble to the kisui. And the kisui becomes an avela, at the very least, because of the heat. So in the case of the Aruch HaShulchan or the Beis Yosef, it's that the whole lid is melichiks, and the pot is fleshik, it's the other way around. And there are no tipas, there is no liquid, except for the assumption is that there will be, later on, as a result of the continuous connection between the two, that there will be vapor, there will be steam rising, which therefore will in some ways connect the two. And by connecting the two, what we mean is that one will draw from the other one. And that's where we will have, of course, a problem for the two of them, for the kisui and for the pot. In Sif Ches, where we saw pretty much the dinim of zeya and how they affect when one is on top of the other, we say that there's a similar din in Taaruvot where two pots, one fleshik and one melchik, or one iser, one heter, are both being covered by a machvas. This time the machvas is sitting on top. And that machvas, as a result of it acting as a sealing, the two pots having no lids of their own, their vapors intermix. And that, of course, in Hilchos Aruvos, we saw that it also causes a problem. We did, however, add that there may be a possibility that if the vapor has room to spread, as opposed to being in a very narrow spot where it's completely going straight up, If in fact that's the situation where the vapor is able to spread, that may be less of a problem, according to some opinions. Only according to some opinions. Allowing the vapors to spread out, there's more room, would not affect, because then the steam is not perhaps so concentrated. That's the way I would understand the physics behind it. The vapor is able to spread. And that's this whole idea of room in ovens, bechlal, is a very important concept, because of the shaila of cooking or baking at the same time, melachis and fleishiks, which we of course try not to do unless one is covered. When one is covered, then even lechatchila it should be okay. We said that there's no problem with that if one of them is covered. And preferably I would say that the fleishik should be covered. That's the one that has the most, or the tam that's coming out of it, more so than the cheesecake or something. No? Maybe. There was a question, as if you recall, whether zeya is only a byproduct or is a problem of nozlim, of that which is liquid, or if the zeya is the same when it's coming from a davar mutzak, a solid. I mean, you don't really have that much of condensation, I guess you would call that, from or immediate or the same amount as if you have from liquids that is condensing. Anyway, that was Sif Ches. That when the machvas at the bottom is megula, the Rama adds, when it is uncovered, then there's a problem that the zeya is right underneath the kedera, as opposed to being far apart, where then, by being far apart, we can actually see that the zeya will not be yad soledes at the point it reached there. So the proximity is what causes the problem. Then there was an interesting Rama about lechatchila, because if it's not yad soledes boy, it's not so much of an issue. He actually seems to say, go ahead and dry up your salamis on top of those pots of milk that are underneath in the same area. I mean, we don't have that kind of a situation, but this could come in. This is handy. I mean, these halachas are pertinent when you're dealing with smoking. Meat, fish. So there, you actually, smoking is not just a matter of zeya, it's also that you have the reach, you have perhaps even, you have other issues there. You definitely don't want to smoke Isser and Heter together in the same area, or unless of course they're completely exposed, the place is exposed, it's open, and well ventilated, I guess that's a better word for it. Because then again, the smoking process involves heat too, it's not just the reach. It involves the heat, and it involves the zeya coming out.
The question is if it's still.
Yeah, then of course it's less of a problem. That's what the Ramah seems to say.
But it would also be less smoking.
Oh, it would be less. Yeah, that's true.
How could the Ramah
above? If it's high, once
you
if
have people who that meat.
No, the meat is dry, completely dry meat that is drying up. Yeah, it's a dry meat. It's not
already dry.
Yeah, it's already dry. Yeah. And it's just drying. It's a process of drying for salami purposes, I guess.
For salami.
Yeah.
It's dry. It's going out of
Apparently, yeah.
That would get people onto the milk.
You're right. If that would be the case, it would be a problem, because even if you would have a lachluchis, I saw somewhere, if you would have some moisture form on the foods, on the food items, it would be a problem. But here they're far enough not to pose a problem. Some say the Ramah does not allow this lechatchila, even though it says lachen toilin bosol yavesh akdei shel cholav v'lo chayshina lezeya shemegula lezeya sheoile. But not everybody seems to say that the Ramah allowed this lechatchila. But if it happened, it will be okay. The problem is here that one of the issues is that certain things that are in close proximity, but they may not have the ability to be mavliya, right, a tam, nevertheless they may require hadacha. And whatever requires hadacha, we learned already that you cannot do it lechatchila because you may forget to do hadacha.
Well, this is something that you do hadacha.
Exactly. So this is the reason why he would be mati here, is because these meats are regularly, they do hadacha to them anyway. Yeah. That would be the only reason, or one of the ways that he would be matir something like this, is because even though you see it's true, you might need hadacha, as the poskim say, then in this kind of case you would need hadacha. Then how could you do it lechatchila? Elamai, it's talking about a food item that is regularly rinsed anyway after the process, so we don't doubt or we don't suspect that he may forget to do the halacha. So that's why there's mention of this over here, this particular scenario of drying the meats, but I don't know who would do that unless he really has no room whatsoever and he's in a big rush to do to take care of both of this. Okay, before we go on to Sif Tes, I thought it would be a good idea to review the halachas of Irui, just Irui. In Hilchos Taaruvot, we went through a little bit the differences, the various forms of heat, including Kli Sheni. Kli Sheni, as you know, is less of a problem. We're making the assumption, but that by the time the hot liquid or hot food has been transferred over from the original keli that was on the fire onto another pot, it has cooled off sufficiently, and it's not mevashel. There's still opinions, especially the Rashba. Kli Sheni, if it's still very, very hot.
There are opinions, even if it's lit well in a Kli Sheni.
Exactly, that's how we hold. That's how we hold. We hold the Kli Sheni eno mevashel, even if it's yad soledes boy. But in Yore Deah, at least the Mechaber says, you want to be careful with the Kli Sheni too.
It's quite reasonable, because how does one thing matter?
Yeah.
By transit to that other.
That's correct.
But in a vessel that was not on the fire,
right,
the walls of the vessel are cold.
Yeah.
So they're absorbing the heat food inside.
That's
so
correct.
The temperature was being lowered continually.
Yeah, but what is the problem?
You're saying that if you put one Kli Sheni,
one from a Kli Rishon that's on the fire, right? You pour into another.
It doesn't matter how
it makes no difference anymore.
Wait. Once it's in the other Kli.
Once it landed in the other Kli. Exactly. We made that determination that Kli Sheni Eino Mevashel. However,
but it's quite reasonable to make that
determination. It is. But you know why?
Explain why.
But you know why it's not so simple.
Right.
It's not so simple because you can say that by Shabbos. When you need bishul, is this bishul or not bishul? But when you're talking about Isser and Heter, that all you need is for some to be mavliya into something else, as opposed to be mavliya and maflit. To do even one pe'ula, as some would hold in Kli Sheni, that it may not do both pe'ulas, but it may do one pe'ula.
Oh, so there the question Sheni.
Exactly, yeah.
There the question is not whether
if it's mevashel or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether you have it in a Sheni.
Yeah. And we will see. There are various scenarios. There's a very interesting scenario that we're going to discuss now that applies to Siman Samach Ches, which has to do with blood. We'll talk about it soon. How Irui and Kli Sheni can sometimes make a difference. But right now we need to discuss Irui, because Irui appears to be, if you go through all the poskim, you will come to the conclusion that Irui appears to be an in-between a Kli Rishon and a Kli Sheni, as far as its status, as far as the halacha of what Irui is. Also machloikis. So let's go first through the machloikisim of the Shitas, and then we'll see how it applies to our seif.
So first of all, Irui Rishon, we're talking about a case on the fire or was fire.
Yes.
You're pouring things out of that case.
That's what the word Irui means. Irui means to, yes,
and
to
that
pour.
You're pouring out to be right now, for the sake of discussing in halachas, still connect daily?
We'll talk about that.
We're going to make the
distinction. We're going to make the distinction. We need to, because it's all over the place. We're going to make the distinction. The basic distinction in Irui is you have two kinds. Since you mentioned it, Irui shalon nifsak kiluach, and Irui shenifsak kiluach. An Irui, which means to pour, and the pouring is in a situation where it's continuous. I think shalon nifsak would be a good way. A continuous flow. The shalon nifsak kiluach, the kiluach was not interrupted. Versus another form of Irui, shenifsak kiluach, where the flow has been interrupted. Okay, there are various examples of what's an Irui shenifsak kiluach. The one that shalon nifsak is easy to understand. What would you consider a typical Irui shalon nifsak kiluach?
Pouring hot water from the urn.
Directly, it's pouring. It's continuous. You open up the faucet of the urn, the percolator, boom, it's going down.
Or if you ever watch Hanania out of the big pot into the thing.
You sure? How do you know it's not nifsak kiluach?
Because you watch him do it. He has two.
And he's holding, and it's going up because there's so much in a big pot that it's continuous. It's not stopping.
Yeah.
But what if? Let me ask you a question. What if you took a chainik, as they call it in Yiddish? You know what that is?
Kettle.
I guess you heard it at home, huh? You probably heard Haknish chainik.
I'm joking.
Anyway, you took a kettle with hot boiling water. You took it off the fire. That's okay. You took it off the fire. It's still a Pir Rishon, even though it's Husam al Gabei Ish. It's okay. It's still very, very hot, and we hold that it's Mevashel. Pir Rishon Husam al Gabei Ish. We're mocking with that. So anyway, even though it's off the fire, you went ahead and poured. You do boom, boom. Okay, there's two. Yeah, you poured, and then you stopped pouring.
You stopped pouring.
In other words, you're not continuously pouring like the case of the big challah pot. You poured. That's it. You put it back down.
On the fire?
You put it.
What doesn't matter?
You're doing Irui into something else, right? So you took the kettle, you poured, and you put it back on the fire. So it means it's nifsak akiluach.
It's not.
What?
It's not. I don't know.
Why not?
Because how can you put it in fire?
You put it back on the blech. Okay. So even if it's Shabbos. Anyway, you poured and you put it back down. Even if it's not on the fire, you put it back down. Is that nifsak akiluach or not?
Regarding the water that was down.
Yeah, the Irui that was just poured.
The air that was at the time it was being poured, it was still connected.
Okay.
At the time of the pouring, it served in ear.
Apparently.
Now, I assume by now it's landed in that it was poured.
Of course, yeah.
So now it's cliche.
Yeah, by the time once it has landed, landing creates a situation where the water or the liquid now in its present form is a cliche.
Right.
The whole question is you have something there that is being poured on.
There was
right?
something already in the
Well, yeah. That's what concerns us because we only want to focus on Irui. Mm-hmm. So in order for us to focus on Irui, it has to be that we have actually something there. Something is landing on it, some hot liquid. So we want to know, since we're talking about already the differences between kiluach, shenifsak, and not, what would be the din of Irui that you just did this and you put it right away back down. So it's not apparently it's not continuous apparently, but it is because you're pouring.
At the time you were pouring, it was continuous.
Okay.
So are you saying now at the point where you stopped pouring, it's still going down?
No, okay, so one second. What would be, according to you, a nifsaka kiluach?
Nifsaka kiluach.
It stopped. What would be an example of something that stopped?
Nifsaka kiluach, if that it's from the spout
right.
to the container is long enough that after I stopped pouring, it hasn't landed yet.
Oh, okay, there you go. There you go. There you go. So that's what's understood from the Ramah and elsewhere. There are other examples of nifsaka kiluach too. Yeah, that we saw previously, or it's falling on the
sure.
on a table, on a platform, even though that may be a cliche too once it landed, but we're talking about either one or two cases. It's continuous, and therefore falling on a platform will not make a difference, or it fell and stopped, but it's hot where it fell. So that is an example of nifsak, but it still may be like an irui, because it's hot where it's falling. Anyway, there are all kinds of examples.
It's not being cooled down.
It's not being cooled down, but it's nifsak.
Yeah.
There are various examples of nifsak. But your example is the example I was looking for. And I found it, I think the Ramah actually brings it down. It's always best to read it from the inside. The Ramah in Samach Ches, when he talks about irui, says like this: "Velo mikre irui elok shelo nifsak shelo posak hakiluach." Real irui, Ramah says there, is only called when it's not posak hakiluach mikli harishon, keshenoga lemata. By the time it hit the bottom. Aval im posak kvar lo mikre irui ve'eno oiseh. The key here is, by the time it landed, right, it was not flowing anymore. It wasn't connected to the source. So if, like you said, a long spout, or it was a short boom.
It was a short boom in the distance.
And the distance was that by the time it landed, it was already not flowing.
Right.
There was no need to keep it. No chibur. There's no chibur. A real irui has to be connected for it to be called nifsaka kiluach. So it is possible for it to have stopped. You poured and you put it down.
We're making now this distinction between rishon shenifsak kiluach shelo nifsak.
Yeah, we haven't seen it.
Rishon lo nifsak, I assume, has a very, at least very similar to, if not identical.
Yeah, that's what we're going to see right now. Okay, let's go through the machlokes, the sugya, and then we'll see Sif Tes. And so I think this is a good introduction to understanding the halacha of just of Sif Tes, and to understand other halachas in Hilchos Shabbos too, which if we have time, we'll see one or two. There's a very interesting long taz over here, long taz that goes on if I can borrow the expression, on a tangent. He goes on to other halachas, but all right. Anyway, so in Iru we have basically four sheets. We have the sheet. We have two shittas in Toises, for the most part, two shittas in Toises, and you have it in Shabbos, Masechtas Shabbos, and you have it in Zvachim. The one in Shabbos where you have the Ri in Toises, seems to learn that Iroi from a Kli Rishon is exactly like the Kli Rishon itself, and it's Oyser Kuloi. There's no difference. It's hot, you're pouring, and it's hot. Now, Toises, according to Rabbeinu Tam, another sheet in Toises, is Vachim, is that Iru Mikli Rishon does have a tremendous koach. It's maflit, it's mavliya, but it's only also kedei klipa. It is no longer the same. Why is it no longer the same? I mean, you can say poshet. It's no longer the same because it's not on the fire. Something that's on the fire, we can understand the physics behind it. It continues to cook and it has tremendous power. Something that is removed from the fire, it may be very, very hot, does not have that same koach.
So that's Rabbeinu Tam?
That's Rabbeinu Tam. Famous Rabbeinu Tam, that Iru is mevashel kedei klipa. Iru has the ability to be mavliya and to be maflit. And guess what? Not only does Rabbeinu Tam all of that, so does the Rosh, so does the Rashba, so does the Tur. And I think, and pretty much the Machaber, we're going to see. That's how we hold. Iru mevashel kedei klipa. But so far we didn't make any distinctions in the Iru itself. All we said was Iru. Iru mevashel kedei klipa. Who says there is a difference? We'll see. Not everybody says there's a difference between nifsak hakiluch or not. Plain Iru. The Ran in Shabbos and in Avodah Zarah, I think as well, says, you know what, there is a chiluk. There is a little bit of a chiluk. It all depends on what we're talking about. He says, if the Iru was on liquid, then of course it's not mevashel. Because what happens is when you pour liquid over liquid, just the sheer dynamics of the mixture of the two, just cool, it just doesn't, it can't do it. It can't cook it. The liquid neutralizes that which is being poured on top of it.
Well, it's feasible. It's cold.
It's cold.
Cool.
Right.
So why don't you just simply say?
They learned that too. In other words, once you hold Tatar Gavar, doesn't that affect the din of Irui? Or is the din of Tatar Gavar is it a part of Irui? Because we hold that the Meika Lebola, even if the bottom one is cold and the top one is hot, at the Meika Lebola, so there's at least a Kedei Klipa. So you can learn from that Irui is at least Mevasha Kedei Klipa. If you hold, it's the same din. Yeah. Exactly. So that fits in with Rabbeinu Tam. Exactly. That din of Tatar Gavar pretty much fits in with Rabbeinu Tam.
So the question would be on the Re.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yes.
Why does he also
exactly. Yeah. He would learn differently. Yeah, as far as the din era is concerned. Then you have so the Ran says that if you're not dealing with liquids, you're pouring onto some solid food, kreplach, whatever. So he says over there on a davar gush, yes, iru mevashlu bekuloi. So the Ran basically says, I will agree with the Ri when I'm pouring onto solid, and I will be more lenient than Rabbeinu Tam when I'm pouring into liquids. Rashbam, the exact opposite at the other end.
So now you're still pouring them.
Yeah.
Because if you would be pouring solids, and the fact that they're not really connected.
They're not really connected, right. We're talking about liquid, yeah. Rashbam at the other end says, Irui. Mikli Rishon is not mevashel at all. Not maflit, not mavliya. It's not even oyser kedei klipa. Iru does not have the koach. Iru is not bishul, he says. Apparently, Rabbeinu Tam and those who hold with that shita felt that yes, nochiname, that Iru is not so strong, but it is capable of penetrating a klipa. Klipa is not a lot. It is hot after all. So yes, will that make a difference? Well, in Shabbos it may not be so much of a problem because that's not a real bishul, perhaps. Maybe not. We'll see. But it will be a problem in Nisur Veheter.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is there in Shabbos regarding laws of bishul such a? In Shabbos, what do I care if
we can apply those concepts, but that's not real bishul.
So if I have something cold and I pour something hot from the pot onto that cold thing, in terms of Shabbos, I have just committed an act of. Like, let's say, aren't we usually warned that you take if you're going to pursue?
Because it's a suffix, the Rabbanan answered it. I mean, obviously, it would be a Rabbanan. It's not a real form. It's not a real form of Bishul. The Mishnah Berurah speaks about it, and I don't know if we'll get to it today. Maybe we'll get to it on Thursday to talk a little bit about the Hilchos Shabbos parts of it, which is interesting. Mishnah Berurah has a whole. I'll mention a little bit towards the end what he says. It's a tzorech chiyun as to what you can do, what you cannot do, because we want to always be on the safe side because of the suffix, because of the re.
I mean, the whole point of people second cup on Shabbos to pour from the
we'll talk about that. Yeah,
that's all Eruv.
Right. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. As far as tea, how to do it right. So far we saw the 4 shitas: the Ri, Rabbeinu Tam, the Ran, and the Rashbam. Now, where this can make a big difference, a world of a difference, well, it's actually in many places, but in one place that we have not really got into because it's a Siman that we may not get to very soon. Siman Samaches is the last Sif right before Melicha that talks about Meligat Ha'of. You know what that is? Meligat Ha'of, chickens have feathers. I think all of them do. Anyway, it's a big deal to remove the feathers. It's not an easy job.
That's called Meligat.
How do you, not just the removing of the feathers, right? Meliga involves hot water in order to loosen up the feathers, or to lehafshir. How do you say to lehafshir in English? You have cold meat and you want to make it not as cold.
Warm it up.
I think there's a better word. There's another word for it. When you're you're defrosting it. Thank you.
It's frozen. So it's not just cold.
It's a defrosting, form of defrosting, lehafshir.
And if it wasn't
because
frozen,
if it's you want to salt it. Remember,
if it wasn't frozen,
right?
If it was cold,
right?
It's not chilled.
Also,
then you would not defrosting if it's frozen.
Right, but in Hebrew it would be the same thing. Lehafshir.
So it's not a back translation.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Have to think about that.
No, it's a process of its temperature. It's temperature,
yeah.
But it doesn't suppose.
Yeah, I meant to defrost because that's one of the situations where you would use hot water to bring it to a room temperature of sorts where you can salt that you want to salt the chicken. So you have to be careful when you're doing meligat ha'of to remove the feathers to defrost it, not to pour hot water on it. Mikli rishon.
What?
Because you're cooking it, you're not going to be able to do melicha to it if you cooked it. If pouring hot water on top of it is so hot,
cooking.
It's like cooking.
So you're already cooking it.
So you're cooking the blood into it. Right. It's going to be difficult to take it out. Mechavra holds that it only asks kedei klip over there.
Now, if you did cook without salting, can you subsequently salt after cooking?
No.
Exactly.
It's straight.
So if this is cooking, then it's
right. So it says. So he tells us, En molgim gdaim utlaim, all the types of meat, ve'ofot, chicken, lamb, b'kli rishon, with a kli rishon, elam ken niker et hachelev, unless you already removed the chelev, malcham, and you already salted it. Otherwise, don't pour hot water on it for whatever other reason you may want to do it right now, unless you have first removed the chelev, obviously, because that heat is going to be a problem. From a clear rishon, even though it's irui, it's still going to be a problem. Don't do it.
That's samaches?
That's samaches, yeah. So here the meliga is not called irui, okay? Here is even putting it in hot water. V'chen lo ya'are alehem, that's the irui, mikli rishon. So you don't do the meliga, right? In other words, you don't introduce any heat. Meliga actually does not have to be done with hot water. It can even be done with hivhuv, be'ish, as is another example. To put a little bit in the heat. When you put hair close to the heat, did you ever try something? Do you ever see sometimes your hair touching the flame? It burns up.
Luckily, I have not had that experience yet.
No, just a little bit. Oh. It burns up a little bit. It singes. That's the word, singeing. Oh. Singeing. Yeah. Anyway, any form, any kind of, as the Seif says before, lehavhev, or would be another form.
So lehavhev is.
Yeah, lehavhev is called singeing. Yeah. Let me see here. Anyway, the various forms of heating it up to remove the feathers, to or whatever to do, whatever you're doing with it, you have to be careful not to do it from a clear rishon. And if you did, imira dai beklipa saor. There he says it's enough with the klipa, removing a klipa of the or. And that's what the Ramos says, that it's not called irui unless shalot posek hakiluach. That's what the Ramos says he's din about irui. That for it to be a real irui, it has to be shalot posek hakiluach. All right. So anyway, over there we see that the mechaber.
It's called cliche.
Exactly. So there we see that the mechaber holds like Rabbeinu Tam, the iru mevashel kedei klipa from that halacha itself. And the Ramos says there that there's a difference. Only the Ramah there says, not the Mechaber, that there's a difference between nifsak hakiluach and iru shalon nifsak hakiluach. That if it's nifsak, it's not oiser. The same thing the Shach brings down, the Chochmah Sodom, Primegodom. They basically say that with iru shalon nifsak hakiluach, we're always more machmer, that it's mevashel kedei klipa. So they hold that we're machmer, especially in irui, that shalom nifsak hakiluach. Therefore, if we're going to be machmer, it's going to make a difference on Shabbos. That it's going to be also for us to do, lechatchila, right? And in Basar b'chalav, it's going to be an issue because if it's asos kedei klipa, then we have a kedei klipa that is also behano too. But as I said before, as far as Shabbos is concerned, the Mishnah Berurah there is b'tzorech iyu, legabe, what is permissible and what is not permissible, legabe iru. So if we have time, we'll go into that. But if we're machmir on iru shelo nifsak kiluach, it could affect various areas in halacha. Okay, now in iru shenifsak kiluach, the Achroinim discuss a situation where nifsak. Let's go to nifsak kiluach completely, which is not so pashut. I mean, if it's real iru or not. So there's an Aruch HaShulchan in Minchas Yaakov, I think, in Kaf that they say that if there was nifsak hakiluach, such an irui would affect Michael but not Kalim. Food items, yes. Food is soft. Food absorbs. Somehow the irui, even if it's nifsak hakiluach, somehow does something to the food. Food is what's another word for soft? It's not only absorbent, it's malleable. How do you like that one? Malleable. You would know that word. In other words,
malleable means it's easy.
Yeah, that's also true. But in other words, it's so soft or it's not so rigid that it could actually do something to it. Whereas irish and ifsak falling on a keli, a metal, what can it do to it?
That's
Aruch HaShulchan and the Kaf HaChaim, the Mikvaot.
So that would be an irish and
in discussing.
Then second.
Yes, exactly. It's more serious than klisheni. Klisheni, we go along with the idea that it's the least problem concerning.
There are
Shabbos, yeah, but it's less of an issue than the rest of them. So in discussing irish and nifsak hakiluach, they say that it would affect much more Michael than it would affect a keli because of obviously it's softer, the food.
Now, if irui shalon nifsak hakiluach, according to what we heard a few seconds ago, is kedei lipa.
Right.
Irui shenifsak hakilu, what is it going to accomplish? You need to grade as worse than kiluach.
No. Okay, we'll get to grade. We're not graded yet. If you make a distinction between nifsak versus lo nifsak, besides the distinction that we just made between food and keli, then lo nifsak is the one that asks kedei klipa. Nifsak doesn't answer.
If you make that distinction,
yeah.
Food.
The Ramah says when is irui a problem, that it's mevashel kedei klipa, shalom nifsak hakiluach. Once it's nifsak hakiluach, it's not as a problem. Now we're going to see the Shach doesn't hold like that in a minute. Shach holds, regardless of the two situations, it's always going to be mevashel kedei klipa. Yes, we're more machmer perhaps in lo nifsak, but the Shach is of the opinion that we ask. I think he holds it of a chumrah. He says we're machmer. No, I don't remember. And he even talks about it in Yore Deah, in later on in Taaruvot, where he goes into irui more. He says that we ask kedei klipa regardless of the situation. So, but that's the Shach. Not everybody holds like the Shach. We'll see. So far we have in the category of Irush and Nifsaka Kiluach, we have the Aruch HaShulchan and Minchas Yaakov Kaf HaChaim explain to us that there's a difference between food and keli. Food, you may want to be machmer if you hold there's no difference, But there would be a difference that in the keli it wouldn't be effective. It wouldn't be effective. It wouldn't do anything. The Yad Yehuda I saw says, no, who says there should be a difference between nifsak and non nifsak? You know where there can be a difference? He says, the Yad Yehuda, the only time you could say that there's a difference between nifsak and kiluach, which we don't see anywhere, except for the Ramah, is that on that opinion that holds that it's mevashel bekuloi, irui, like the ri, it's mevashel bekuloi, just like a kriyish nalaish, then you could perhaps make the taina that if it was nifsaka kiluach or no nifsaka kiluach, it would make a difference. Because nifsaka kiluach, then it would not be mevashel bekuloi. So the Yad Yehuda says, where I can understand that there would be such a difference between flow being interrupted versus not, is only according to that opinion, says that Iru is serious business. It's mevashel bekuloi. But we don't hold like that. According to the ones who hold Iru is mevashel kidei klipa, that's all. Why make a difference between nifsak versus no nifsak? It shouldn't make that much of a difference. So he says it doesn't make a difference.
It's interesting. The gabe nifsak he's legal, and then each gabe lo nifsak he becomes machmer.
Yeah. In a sense. And Chazon Ish writes the same, I believe. I think almost sure the Chazon Ish writes that it shouldn't make a difference as far as nifsak versus as far as the klipa is concerned.
But lo nifsak, I thought I saw actually in the Badiyah support that the lo nifsak, it's not that the liquid being poured out is being mevashel. It's transferring the heat rishon.
Yeah. Okay.
But if it was nifsak hakiluach, then it's that is now the source of the problem, and not the heat.
Yes, I understand.
So therefore,
there's a little bit of a difference.
Would be a very, very big difference.
Yeah. There would be a little bit.
Am I extending the rishon that's the rishon, or I'm talking about the effect of something that already left the kli?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't appear to even be a question of heat, even if it becomes cold. Rishon.
Yeah, but once it's cold, it's cold
no,
off.
No. Kli rishon is a heat. Kli rishon is a category of heat.
Category of pot.
No, but he's also right. It's
no,
also the category of the pot.
Yes, literally yes.
Literally.
If it's a kli rishon, it's a kli rishon no matter where I put it and no matter what its temperature. But in terms of the din of halacha,
where it will make a difference.
Kli rishon is a category of heat.
Oh yes.
Like a kli sheni, and not whether it sometimes during its lifetime stood on a fire.
Right.
It's not a question of location, it's a question of heat.
Of heat, yes.
Like Yad Soledet Boy. Yad Soledet Boy is a lower heat than Kli Rishon.
Yeah, but there is a difference between Kli Rishon that is on the fire versus being removed from the fire.
Once it goes below Yad Soledet Boy.
And it still continues to be hot, and it's still a problem. Yeah.
Once it goes below Yad Soledet Boy.
Once it goes below, then it's not a problem. Right. So anyway...
But then you wouldn't be the Kli Rishon anymore, you'd call it a Kli Rishon.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, the Shach holds that we said that the Shach would hold the benifsek kiluach. It's still mavliya kedei klipa. And the same thing, I think the Pri Megadim also I saw Chochmas Sodom. Yeah, and I want to check again the Chazon Ish. The Mishnah Berurah I told you has a suffix legaber in the Hilchos Shabbos, but it appears to be that the Chazon Ish and the Mishnah Berurah say that it's not mavliya. It's not mevashel. In other words, it's not as chomer.
Do you happen to remember off the top of your head which Siman actually?
Yeah, Kufhei.
Okay, that's the topic of Kufhei.
It's there too, sure. Where we have the various forms. You can look at Siv Beis. All right. So now that we understand more or less the various nafkaminas in the forms of Iru, let's look at Siv Tes. This was quite common in Europe. It was not so much in the Sephardic countries. As you know, in the Sephardic countries, for Shabbos, they light with oil. Many do it. Light with olive oil. Yeah, a lot of olives growing in the Mediterranean. And it's a more mehuder too. It's nicer. In Eastern Europe, they did not have olive trees. So what did they use? Wax candles. Now, today's candles are wax. The candles of once upon a time were not always from these kinds of chemicals, but were actually from chalev, fat, forbidden fats. You have to be careful. You can't eat it. So that's that's the halacha of siftes involves such an example of ner shel chelev, a candle of fat, asui kener shel sha'ava, that is very similar to a wax candle. Shenataf mimeno tipa al kli, that a drop of the chelev candle dripped, right? It doesn't pour; it drips. Yeah. From the ner al kli, on a pot, on a mug, on the fish plate. Next to you, you're eating it. It fell on the plate. It's hot. It dripped. It fell on a kli. Ein tzarich ki im greda. The Chabad says, don't worry. It's not the end of the world. All you need is greda. What's greda? The word means scraping, but the Mechaber doesn't tell us how to scrape. Does greda scraping mean you actually have to remove a part of the keli by scraping apart a slice or something? Or does it just mean to rub very, very? Yeah. So we don't know yet from this. It's very unclear. This halacha is taken from the Truma Sedeshin, which I think brings down somebody else. But anyway, it's not clear there. The Makor of the halacha, it's not clear what is intended by grade. But that's all that's required here anyway. Aval, he says, and that's also continuing from the Truma Sedeshin, he makes that chiluk there, that if the chelev is mehutach, cham, shenofel men tipot kli, tzorich hagola. But if the chelev is not dripping off a solid chelev candle, it's dripping from a chelev mehutach, melted chelev that is directly surrounded or it's in the midst of the candle. In other words, the flame is pretty much sitting in it.
It's touching the flame.
It's touching the flame. So you have not solid, but you have liquid form of chelev in a very, very hot surrounding. If the chelev from that dripped on a keli, then tzorich hagola. Then you would require a gola. Okay. So now that we are a little bit familiar with irui, let's apply it to this din. Because this din has pretty much, this is a din of irui. Apparently there's a difference between a drop of chelev dripping off a solid candle, it's irui, versus a drop of molten chelev dripping from the liquid form of chelev.
So in the second example, the liquid, it's like a kind with olive oil.
Yes, exactly. In the second example, the liquid chelev is like a container of olive oil.
It's chelev instead
of it's chelev, exactly. Yeah. One is apparently hot, very hot, and the other one is hot but less hot. Otherwise, why should one require hagala and the other one need greda? So let's understand what the difference is between the two.
It's difficult because the question is we don't know exactly what greda means. We don't know exactly what.
Yeah, we'll get to that, but that's a separate question. Yeah. So anyway, so it's understood over there in that halacha misvara that when you have tipas chalav falling off, dripping off.
You're talking about chalav?
Now chalav, going back to chalav. That perhaps it doesn't cause a big problem by chalav, dripping off, falling off. In other words, it may not, because it's not clear rishon, right? So we can understand tipas chalav falling off to the side, not answering everything. Well, depending on if where it fell, it's hot or not. But anyway, we can understand that. Versus this example, when you have the liquid chelev versus chalev, that is actually melted and the flame is directly there, and that dripping off to the side, that would be different. Because this one apparently is hotter than the other ones, especially than the solid candle dripping. If it's in the liquid and the flame is there, what we're saying is that it did not cool off so much. It did not cool off so much, and therefore it resembles more an iru shelo nifsak kiluach.
When you say resembles more, ostensibly, lemaise,
it is. Right.
But it's close in terms of its...
Exactly. And because of that, this will resemble what we just learned. the concept of irui shelo nifsak hakiluach. Therefore, this Mechaber says requires hagala on the keli.
He means by that.
Yeah, okay. Then, with the solid candle, it would therefore be an example of a irui shenifsak hakiluach, because it's a solid. So this is another example of nifsak hakiluach in a different form or fashion, is because it's not coming directly from the fire in a sense. It's dripping from the side. The solid is dripping from the side, and not that it is an irui shenifsak hakiluach. It resembles an irui shenifsak hakiluach, right? Because
why would it be? I mean, it is after all something that's dripping.
it's
So
dripping,
it's
yeah,
liquid.
but it's not dripping from the fire,
Exactly.
which therefore makes it more like a nifsak hakiluach.
Well, I assume that when it's dripping down, there is some interruption between itself and where it's coming
Yes.
from. In both cases, it's being interrupted. Only that the second case, we're more machmir, is because the interruption doesn't help us when it's been heated up to such an extent that was right at the fire itself.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It's not like
Well,
milk in a
of course,
pot.
there is an interruption. Very good.
But it's not like milk in a pot, because milk in a pot you have the fire that is heating the pot,
Right.
and it's heating the milk.
Right.
But here, where you
And therefore, what happens there?
so you have an intermediary between the fire and the milk,
And
and the
therefore,
milk is being heated to a certain degree.
yeah.
But the
And what
degree-
happens?
It's determined by the pot. Wait,
Yeah.
let me compare it.
Right.
But where you have the molten chaleb, it's being heated directly by the flame. There is no pot between it and the chaleb.
Yeah.
So the heat of the chaleb is a much higher degree of
Yes,
heat
that's correct.
than the milk in the pot, because there you have the kedera.
Therefore, what's the din of the milk in the pot?
Milk of the pot would be less machmir.
Right. It would be similar to the drop of the candle of the flame,
that's what
of
you
the
meant.
solid. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Right.
No. So those, you can see where there's a apparent. I guess you said it very well. It's really more a matter of heat than anything else. But I use this as an example, and it's not me. The Toyskin used this as an example of this resembles more irui shenifsak, and this resembles more irui shelo nifsak. The solid candle is more like the irui nifsak because of the heat, the less heat, and there is less heat with nifsak, versus like you said, when it's sitting in the fire, when it's surrounded by the fire, going directly, it's still
It's
being
the pot. It's
Yeah.
not something that's being poured out of the pot that stood on the fire.
Right.
Here the chaleb is the pot in terms of its proximity to the fire.
Yes, and that's falling off directly. Yeah, okay. Anyway, that's the Mechaber. The Mechaber says that this would require Hagala. Why would it require Hagala? Because if it's like Iru Shalon Nifsak HaKiluach, does it require Hagala by Iru Shalon Nifsak HaKiluach? Yeah, I was thinking about it.
It's machlokes, what he...
Yeah, but Poshet Pshat, we're not getting into any... Why would he require Hagala for this? If it's, can it be more than Irui?
Yeah, I can only be with the side of the machlokes that says...
That what?
They say that what the Machaber means is, since you're talking about a
Right.
if you don't want to start being Mekale from the Klipa,
Okay.
so then you would Hagala.
Okay.
Maybe there can be
Very
no,
good, okay.
Maybe there can be no Yore because there's no plate. The candle's liquid, and it's going to require a higher level.
Yeah, but in order to understand the Mechaber's requirement of Hagala, we have to go on to Greda. And I think that will help us. But you were in the right direction, apparently.
The Greda is also Machlokes.
Yeah. So first of all, what did we say till now? That the Greda is a concept that we saw it briefly in Taaruvot. Greda is a requirement or shifshuf of sorts with sakin. Sometimes when it's cold, cutting with a cold knife a cucumber, and it's a treif, they cut the fish for you, and they're using knives that were used for shrimp, right, and crabs, and what's that other one?
Mari.
No, lobster, right? So anyway, you would have to make greda or shifshuf, or rinse it very well with water at the edges where the knife touched. You can actually do it lechatchila, let him cut if you don't have your own knife, and that's what would be required. It's all cold application, no heat, even though it's a sakin. Sakin requires a little bit to be removed. So the question is, first of all, what greda is here, and is it more or less than a klipa? because he's using greda.
Or is it a klipa?
Or is it a klipa? Thank you. Exactly. What is it? If it is, then why call it greda? Anyway, yeah. So we're not sure. We're not clear yet what greda is over here. The question is, when saying greda, does it mean to actually remove a slice of the keli, if that's possible, and I say possible in quotes for a reason, or does it actually just mean leshafshef, to rub hard, especially we're talking about chalev. We're talking about, have you seen wax stick to anything? It's hard to remove it. If that's what it's talking about, great, just remove it and you're okay. Okay, so that's a question. Now, before we answer that question, everybody has a little bit of an issue with the shach over here. He's the one that holds, the shach is one of the ones that holds that irui, even with nifsak kiluach, will require klipa. And over here, he says, the reason why you need greda, dai begreda. He says, the lo choshiv irui, it's not even called irui, given the posak kiluach. Oh, wow. Wait a minute. So he's saying greda is less than klipa over here. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that in Siman Sadik Aleph, I think, in Basar בחלב earlier, but especially in Siman Sadik Gimel, the next Siman, the Shach says the greda is klipa. It's an obvious question. I mean, a lot of people ask that question. I mean, he says clearly, it's the same thing. Here he says that all you need is greda because this is not irui, and therefore you don't need klipa. And he's the one that says that you need klipa even benifsak hakiluach, which is the case that we're talking about. Okay, so this is a case of nifsak hakiluach, when it's dripping off the solid candle. You yourself said that even that case would require klipa, and now you even say that it's not a klipa, that it's less. I mean, you see the...
There is a possibility to explain it, but I don't know that it applies, because I looked at the these three locations. It could be that where the shach is talking about greda being aidei klipa, that's another word for saying the same thing, that he's recounting his own understanding. Whereas here he might be trying to explain the mechaber, and maybe he holds the mechaber distinguishes between greda. So you were saying the mechaber, according to understanding greda, is less than the klipa. Here goes by the greda because it's not even irui. Whereas over there, where he says greda is kedei klipa, maybe he's giving his own understanding of what greda is.
So anyway, I think the best explanation for the shach is a very easy explanation given by the Minchas Yaakov. He says the shach is talking about two separate things when he gives the definition of greda. Here, in giving the definition of greda, he's talking about a keli. And he says with keli, he didn't mean to say you have to actually remove a part of the keli. He meant shifshuf. He meant it's less. It's less than a... Yeah, it's less, yeah.
Over there, he's talking about a food item?
Over there, where he says it's like a klipa, he's talking about food items because the food items are actually it's more mavliya. In other words, the Mikvaot Yaakov doesn't explain that what the shach says on the word greda, what it actually implies, but it's that it's different between a keli and machol. By food, it's somehow the irui is more mashpia, as we said earlier, and therefore it requires a klipa of sorts. Whereas by a keli, it's not so mashpia, and therefore it's enough to do greda. But still, we still don't know exactly what the word greda means, what actually is done, but that it's less than a klipa. Because it doesn't affect the keli so much. Comes along the Chavas Das, and it says the greda is mashma. Actually, you have to remove a little pieces of the keli.
Yeah. So
if that's the case, I understand the mechaber. Why you need hagala? How are you going to do that? I think that's what you were saying. The only reason why the mechaber would say you need hagala if all it is a klipa or something close to it is because you can't take a klipa of a keli.
Yeah. Maybe the Chavas Das was for that.
Could be. Because by kli cheres, there are those that hold that kli cheres is like food. It actually goes deep in. Yeah, kli cheres. So anyway, if it was really very, very hot, directly from the source of the fire, it would require hagala, the mechaber says. Chazon Ish is mashma that greda that the mechaber uses is only shifshuf. Just be meshafshef, rub off that which is davuk, that which is stuck, the sticky part of the chalev, and then you're done with it. But that's of course only in the case where the candle is solid, and it dripped off. In Mechabes, it's clear if it's coming from a well of molten, chalev, and it's dripping off, it's going to require Hagolah. But the example of Greda would be an example of Nisika Kiluach, or an example where, you don't have to do much more than just rub it off, according to the Chaz. So that's the Chazon Ish in explaining the word Greda. In other words, otherwise we have no, by itself, I have to assume Greda in food is obviously removing some, like we're always taught. That's what Greda means, to remove. But in a keli, it's a good question. You actually have to remove? It doesn't say that anywhere. Netila we know is a lot more. That we know. We learned what kedei netila means, that it's more than kedei klipa. But it would Greda be a klipa? It appears to be, just by learning Pashup Shah, just by learning the various scenarios and halachas, that Greda is less than a klipa. And so we need the Mechas Yaakov to tell us that although the Shach says it klipa, he said it by food. Because that's pretty much what you're doing. You're removing a little bit. Okay, the difference between Greda and klipa is very, very minute. I mean, so he uses klipa. It's a good explanation. By a keli, I think it's okay to learn the way the Chazon Ish learns. I mean, it's understood that you can't, or you don't have to remove a slice of the keli. You just rub it off. But if we're talking about a situation where it's very, very hot, coming directly from the fire, dripping that molten wax, then we're going to be more machmir, because that is a form of shelon nifsaka kiluach, in the amount of heat. And therefore it requires a gola, because that's the closest thing to what you can do to such a klipa. Not that it really would need. Maybe it would need more than a klipa, but anything that needs a klipa, you can do hagola anyway. You have to be machshir the keli. I mean, how are you going to make it kosher if not through hagola?
So maybe with something like a wound.
Yeah, but there may be ways. We did learn that there may be other more lenient ways of making hagola. That, yes, we did learn, and there are.
Now the hagola would only be required to take klipa. You don't
Yes.
need to do the whole obvio of the case.
Right. So therefore, whenever it's only kedei klipa, it's less of an issue of how much or how to perform the hagola. But the hagola is required is anyway the halacha here. Okay, I think we'll stop here.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.